Hello, everybody. My name is Paulo de Castro Reis, and I'm the Executive Director of the Chamber of Commerce Brasil-Canada, based in Brazil, but also with an office in Montreal. We would like to welcome you all to the Brazil-Canada Talks, promoted by CCBC, the Chamber of Commerce Brazil-Canada. We are living challenging times, and CCBC has created this event that is called Brazil-Canada Times, where we will be promoting a dialogue among Canadian and Brazilian participants. We had a seminar similar to the one we're having now 2 days ago in Portuguese for a major Brazilian audience. And the idea now is to replicate this event in English for the Canadian audience. Of course, people from Brazil are also welcome to assist this event, but it will be in English. We're fortunate to have a very special group with us today. And it's a group with high-level diplomats of both countries. So we have Jennifer May, the ambassador of Canada in Brazil, Heather Cameron, the Consul General of Canada in São Paulo, Evelyne Coulombe, Consul General of Canada in Rio, Elise Racicot, Consul and Senior Trade Commissioner in Brazil, and Pedro Henrique Borio, Ambassador of Brazil in Canada, and Lélia Beltrame, Consul General of Brazil in Toronto, Rubens Gama, Consul General of Brazil in Montreal, and Silvio José Albuquerque Silva, Consul General of Brazil in Vancouver. So we will start. As I mentioned, my name is Paulo de Castro Reis, and I would like to start inviting the Ambassador of Canada in Brazil, Jennifer May, for a few words. Before starting, I would like also to give some recommendations about the dynamics of the event. We would like everyone to have their cameras and microphones in mute and disabled. And the speakers will turn on their cameras while they're speaking. Anyone who have questions can send their questions through the chat. Some of the questions will be answered right at the chat. Some of the questions will be answered in the second part of the event, and some other answers that could not be answered during the event will be answered after the event. So now I would like to call Ambassador of Canada in Brazil, Jennifer May. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paulo. And I'd like to thank everybody participating today. Et un grand bonjour aux personnes qui sont à Montréal, spécialement. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. What I thought I would do is I will give you an overview of what the situation here in Brazil looks like in terms of COVID, a look at what some of the political dynamics are, and what's going on in terms of Canada's activities here. I'm going to look at it from a national level, and as Paulo mentioned, my colleagues in Sao Paulo and Rio will also be speaking, and they will bring down into more detail, and in particular, more about how we're working and how we can support the Canada-Brazil relationship very specifically. So I think all of us who work with and in Brazil know that the numbers are always big here. the size of the country means that everything happens on a large scale. So I will give some numbers later, but I think the real question people have at this point in the COVID crisis globally is, where are we on the curve? And it is very much my sense that we are still, unfortunately, on that up ramp. And that's not surprising, given that the first deaths, if we take that as a marker, the first deaths in Brazil came approximately 52, I think the first one was 52 days ago, but approximately 2 weeks later than the first deaths that were in Europe. So Brazil right now has the 8th largest number of cases globally and the 6th largest number of deaths. And that compares to 12th for Canada. So given the size difference, it's frankly almost a surprisingly low number. And that's been one of the concerns, has been around how much testing is being done. And it's interesting because Brazil is developing some very innovative ways of getting the testing out there. And here in Brasilia, for example, they've started doing testing in drive-throughs where you can go and be tested. For people who don't have cars, that's not such a great option, but they're doing testing then in subways, and also at those of you who know the key cutting kiosks, testing being done there as well. So getting out to the people. So the testing numbers are increasing, which undoubtedly will also increase the number of cases. The number of deaths by population is actually relatively low. And if we look at the numbers, it's been 4.39 per 100,000 in Brazil. And again, for comparison with Canada, it's at 12.25 per 100,000 in Canada. So the real question everybody wants to know is, when is this going to peak and when is it going to start declining? And I wish I had a crystal ball that I could tell you that. I haven't met the person yet who feels that they can say that with confidence anymore. Former Minister Mandetta, Health Minister Mandetta, had indicated that at one point he thought it would be this week. Currently, what I'm hearing is more a range, and I think that sounds very realistic. And depending on the part of the country, depending on the measures that are taken, the peak is expected to hit somewhere between May and July. So that's the kind of range of dates that I'm hearing. And I'm looking forward to hearing, I know Brazilian colleagues will have other insights into this, but this is just a collection of some of the publicly available data. As I said, it's a big country, big differences, and sometimes what you get in the media are the starkest examples of what's going on. There are currently 6 states where the public and private healthcare systems are considered to be collapsing. And there are 15 cities in northern Brazil that are now in lockdown. And but this, again, speaks to the divergence of experiences and the way that the crisis is playing out in different parts of the country. In terms of political perspectives, I think one thing that I can say is that politics did not end with the COVID crisis. That the rich drama that plays out here has continued. And I say that simply because I think people's expectations are sometimes unrealistic that all of that was going to end. And we've continued to see the same types of tensions, the same variety of views, and the same personalities. It's just the themes now are around COVID are the ones that are at the front of people's minds. The new health minister, Nelson Taig, is very well respected, and hear very positive things about his approach. And certainly we're not seeing between the departure of his predecessor and himself a difference in the tactics that are being taken. And that's something that I've spoken to people within the World Health Organization and others who are saying that this is what they're seeing, those who are cooperating closely with the health ministry. There's also another major player here in Brazil is the military. And again, for people in Canada, the military is playing a much greater role than in Canada. And I would say in 2 different ways. One is in terms of their role in creating field hospitals, and the other is in terms of their role within ministries. And in particular, those strengths and logistics come to the fore. So the last thing I would like to just mention is the way we're working here. All of our government offices have remained open, but obviously we're working virtually. This is going to change, and it has changed already, the way we can offer our services, and that's something that my colleagues will speak to in more detail. We continue to work on supporting Canadians who need and want to return to Canada. We've helped a lot of Canadians to return, including there were a couple of cruise ships where we helped them in terms of some difficult logistics, and also in terms of supporting Canadians who need it with emergency loans. And the final thing I wanted to really flag is the way we're working closely with the Brazilian government. We're working in terms of the international agenda. Our foreign ministers are speaking regularly together with other colleagues. We have health ministers in the G20 speaking together. We are working together with various states and health authorities to see what Canadian capacities and technologies and products we have, in particular in the health sector, that we can do. That we can provide. And the last thing that I really want to share is that we're also working very, very closely in terms of research and development. That Canada has invested $50 million in vaccine development and another $70 million in rapid research. And there are many projects that are ongoing in cooperation between Brazil and Canada. So thank you very much, Paulo, and thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. And now I would like to call the Brazilian ambassador in Canada, Pedro Borio.
Good morning, Paulo. Good morning, all the staffers from the chamber that work for this initiative, and a very special good morning and thanks to the Canadian colleagues, my friend Jennifer May, who just made my life much easier by summing up the situation in Brazil so well, so precisely, in such a clear way. Certainly made my life much easier. And a big thanks also to the other Canadian officers in Brazil. Let me just mention to start that I think, Paulo, that it's a small historic moment what we did this week, because I do not have any recollection that all the Brazilian and Canadian agents ever met, and especially met like this. So I hope this is something that we'll be able to do many times in the future. And since the time is not so big, we will be able to explore specific themes in detail anytime you would like to do it. I'll be totally in favor of that. I'm sure my colleagues too. Jennifer mentioned something very important. The same thing is going on here in Canada. We are open and working very hard. Not open in the usual manner sometimes because we are respecting the local rules. So we are open for appointments or for essentially giving preference to emergency services, but no one will be without a service if needed. And we particularly would like to encourage the Brazilians who might feel they are in a more fragile situation, or that they might soon become in a more difficult position, see themselves in a more difficult position, to remain in contact with us. We believe the situation in Canada is much better than what happened to Brazilians in other countries, where we had to administer very big emergencies with people sleeping literally in the sidewalks near the airports, or expelled from hotels. This is certainly not the case in Canada, and so far we are confident that with the progressive reopening of flights and contacts between the countries, those that want to return will be able to do so. We helped a lot of people who needed to come back to Canada also in the beginning. We are monitoring very closely the large population of students, and I'm sure my colleagues from the consulates will expand on that a little bit. The other point I would like to mention is this: for us, this event, and I don't want to talk too much because I would love to hear the questions, it's very important to try to figure out as fast as possible which are the stumbling blocks that the companies, those that operate the trade relations, the commerce, which after all are the key aspect of this chamber, are seeing right now, which are the difficulties that they foresee in the possible near future, and also what lays ahead. We are collecting data right now to try to figure out what is going to be the relation, in particularly the trade between Brazil and Canada in the very near future. And I'm sure there will be major adjustments. It will be very important and provocative for us to hear comments from people in the field in different sectors like mining, fertilizers, and other, so that we can best assist you. I always repeat, and I'll do it again here, that there's no such thing as a bad question. Please feel free to contact us. We will be happy to explore the themes that might pop up in detail with you at length. And I'm very glad that Jennifer mentioned, I think it's a positive example to highlight what we can do, the potential in science and technology. Everybody is dreaming of a vaccine, of a sort of a turning point, or not to speak about a miracle, but as a turning point, believing in science regarding this current crisis. And this certainly allows us to bring to the discussion the fact that Brazil is one of the countries that has a very large experience in inoculating its entire population, also in producing vaccines. So, as I mentioned in the Wednesday debate, it's not a question just of finding a vaccine, but it will certainly be a question also of producing enough vaccines to inoculate close to 3 billion people around the planet. We certainly will be part of this process, and will be in the forefront, I dare say, of this process, based in our experience, in our expertise, in our capacity. And I foresee very exciting possibilities between Brazil and Canada to get there. But before we get there, it would be quite important for us to try to map what's going on in our trade relations, what is the impact of the extreme turmoil that we are seeing that has frustrated developments that we were following with great excitement, like the growth in air cargo, to give you an example, or the continuous growth in tourism between the two countries, and so on. So I'll bring my initial comments to a close here, because I would love to see more of a debate, and I'm sure we'll have a very, very rich one today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pedro. And now I would like to call the Consul General of Canada in Rio de Janeiro, Evelyne Coulombe.
Alors, bonjour à tous. Hello to all my fellow panelists, and also everyone participating in this webinar. So I'll speak today about how we adapted our work in Brazil, like how all the Canadian missions adapted their work to continue to do our best to serve our consular clients and also our trade clients, and in addition to deepening the bilateral relations between Brazil and Canada. So we are working mostly remotely, as the ambassador mentioned. In Rio, in particular, we have a completely virtual consulate since March 24th, and in the embassy in Brasilia and in Sao Paulo, we have reduced our staff to only essential staff going in during very restricted hours. So we set up an emergency response team across the country with the Ambassador May as incident commander, and the team is composed of diplomatic staff from all of our missions. So we also have working groups that work on specific topics like planning and consular and human resources. And we also send, of course, our daily reports to headquarters to keep them updated of what is going on in Brazil. So at the beginning, our work on the consular side was really focused on helping Canadians to return to Canada. So there was an announcement by the Prime Minister that encouraged all the Canadians traveling overseas to return to Canada. So we had to support them and to do this, to return to Canada. We also had many Brazilians who were here that are that have their family members in Canada. For example, a Brazilian spouse with a Kenyan spouse who stayed in Canada and things like that. So we had to produce some family reunification letters to facilitate the Brazilians to return to Canada. So it was very rewarding to be able to reunite families. And as the ambassador mentioned, we also had a few cruise ships going through. And so we had to facilitate the disembarking and the traveling of the Canadians to go back to Canada. So now we still have about 1,300 Canadians who are registered in our registration of Canadians abroad system, or we call it ROCA. And so we do have quite a few Canadians left in Brazil. The majority of them made the decision to stay here. They're usually residents of Brazil. And so we send them regular messages to give them advice how to safely shelter in place in Brazil. We also give them information on flight availability for those who want to return. And we have regular contacts with our network of wardens in the country. These are Canadians that are long-term residents in Brazil and who are they know the community, the Canadian community in their area, and they're able to inform us of the situation of Canadians across the country. So in addition to our response to the pandemics, we were able to advance our work in other areas. And I just want to go back briefly and just say that one of our priorities as well is to take care of our staff well-being and mental health. So this week is the Mental Health Week in Canada. This is very important. Our staff are now working from home. They have in addition to their work responsibilities, they have the families to take care of their kids. They have housework duties and things like that. So, there's quite a bit of pressure, plus the uncertainty of the pandemic. So we do a lot of activities and initiatives to try to keep the staff engaged and take care of their well-being. So to go back to other themes that we were able to advance in spite of the quarantine measures, I want to mention it's a project that I have a special place in my heart, is the Action Plan for Women in Mining. This is a project we've been working on for about 2 years with IBRAM, Women in Mining Brazil, END 101 companies, the CCBC, and it is an action plan to guide companies, particularly mining companies, to increase the number of women in the mining sector with all the benefits that entails. So we're supposed to launch in events in several cities of Brazil in March, but because of the pandemics, we've done a virtual launch that was quite well attended, and because we believe that it's still important for companies to keep their attention on gender equality even during this time. We also did a series of webinars on digital transformation in the oil and gas sector with the university here in Rio, because the oil and gas sector is particularly hit very negatively by the pandemic, and so we see in digital transformation an opportunity for companies to increase their productivity, reduce their costs, and Canada is very well positioned to work in this area. So we've organized a webinar on that theme, and we're looking at a series of webinars that we can organize as well on the impacts of the pandemic on various sectors. So we're looking at doing one on the mining sector, the energy sector, and another one on the oil and gas sector. So I think I'm running out of time. I have the the warning here. So I'll keep my initial remarks to those, and happy to answer questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyne. And now I would like to call the Consul General of Brazil in Toronto, Lélia Beltrame.
Good morning again. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. I'm very happy to be here with you again. We are dividing our position here in Toronto in good news and bad news. I will do the bad news first. It's the students. We have here around 10,000 Brazilian students, universities, colleges, and language schools. They are doing fine. But the money is coming to an end. If these students don't come back to regular jobs soon, I am afraid we are going to have a second wave of consular situations. I understand that Ontario is to start again on the 19th May, next week, and I do hope so. It will help our students a lot if they can come back to regular jobs. Second point are the language schools. They closed down, of course, and they postponed courses. They give vouchers to students, and the whole situation is not clear. I can foresee spending some time with our language students to sort out all the small situations between them and the language schools. And so that's how we are consular, as far as the consular service is concerned, and mainly education in our students here. Now I'll open some space for good news, which are to be given by Ademar. Go, Ademar.
All right, yes, good afternoon to all. Bonjour à tous. Nous sommes ravis d'être ici avec vous aussi. Well, in fact, I just covered some basic and fundamental aspects of Brazilian economy. Of course, I think it's a little bit pretentious to say that there are good news in this severe situation of devastation that everybody's facing. But the things has been facing in equal terms for every stakeholder concerned. Of course, not only Brazil and Canada, but almost everywhere in the world, we have been through a serious economic downturn. And in particular, in case in Brazil, we have been struck by industry, deindustrialization, higher level of unemployment, which has tripled in the past, say, couple of months or so, basically in April, problems with income, revenue, investments, and so on and so forth. But a very positive side of all of this, we had just precisely yesterday, very good news on Brazil's trade balance. And there is an expectation that the world trade will recede between 13 to 30% in 2020. But Brazil has been the only country, only between among the G20 countries to show a trade surplus during the month of April. So we have fared quite well in these terms, because we have had a surplus of about $17.5 billion US dollars index in our trade balance. And this has to do basically with our trade with Asia and East Asia, and basically with China. And we are expecting for this year, by the end of this year, that this could be the best year ever for Brazilian trade with China and with certain Asian partners, in spite of this overall great downturn of around 15-18%, which are being expected by the WTO. And we cannot forget that even though we are, of course, in very bad shape, as everybody else is, due to the recession, the threats of depression in the economy, that's it as a global phenomenon. But we must never forget the fundamentals of Brazil's economy. So we just before the outbreak of the pandemics, we have been the fourth largest FDI destination in the world, with more than 40% of the whole of Latin America. Interest rates had been very low as well. Inflation, consumer confidence, and the stock exchange and international reserves, which were amounting to almost $400 billion. So we were doing a kind of macroeconomic exercise that were very positive in terms of recovering Brazil's economy from the recession that we've been through between 1915 and 1918. And the program of essential economic and structural reforms of Brazil economy in terms of pension reform, the tax system reform. Well, pension reform had been approved just before the pandemic outbreak. State reform, labor reform, which had done a lot of agility and a lot of efficiency to the labor market in Brazil. Concessions and privatizations, which made it possible for Brazil to get around $77 billion in extra investments in 2019, and the efforts which were being carried out by economic authorities in Brazil and several ministries which are dealing with economy, like mines and energy, infrastructure, and the economy itself, for the elimination of our public deficits, or at least substantial reduction of the public deficit. So pension reform would be perhaps the best candidate for this elimination. Concessions in oil and gas, all the privatization concessions and PPPs which were being put forward at that moment, privatization of the state companies and subsidiaries, and the elimination of lots of costly subsidies which were being carried through the economy itself. So they were expecting a cut in 10% of the subsidies. So everything were gearing towards very much better economic performance of Brazil, and we hope that when we cross over this turbulent seas and turbulent times, we could recover those basic fundamentals which are very positive. And not to mention the last mention that we would make, of course, Brazil's efforts to diversify its economy. We have a very competitive energy sector, aeronautic industry, our food industry and agriculture, which precisely has promoted the result in our trade balance this last month, and also biotechnology and health as well. And with Canada, we also must not forget that we had very important investments. Brazil is the 80th largest foreign investor in Canada, with a business in agro-foods, in mining, in cement, in services. So we have, likewise, Canada has very important investments in Brazil, and we hope that we could enhance and this picture with the conclusion of the Mercosur-Canada free trade agreement. So just this, and thank you so much.
Merci.
À tous. Merci.
Thank you very much, Ana Lélia and Ademar. And now I would like to call the Consul General of Canada in São Paulo, Heather Cameron.
Muito obrigada, Paulo, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to join this afternoon. Et c'est un plaisir vraiment d'être avec vous. Merci beaucoup pour votre participation. Et pendant les discussions, je serai à l'aise de répondre à vos questions en français ou en anglais ou même en portugais. This afternoon, I'd like to talk about a big piece of our relationship that has been affected by the COVID pandemic, and that's with respect to migration and education. The people-to-people ties and travel between our two countries have been growing greatly over the years and had lots of momentum behind them. But of course, with the pandemic, both Brazil and Canada have introduced new border restrictions, and the Canadian members in our audience will know that Prime Minister Trudeau restricted non-essential travel in mid-March. And likewise, Brazil has restricted the entry of foreign nationals into Brazil at this time as part of its strategy to respond to the challenges of this pandemic. And currently, those travel restrictions in terms of Canadians coming to Brazil are in effect until the end of May. And we will see at that time whether there's further renewals on either the Canadian side or the Brazilian side. And Brazilians wanting to come to Canada, my colleague Evelyne spoke about some of the family reunification work that took place. But beyond this real human dimension, we have created some exemptions that relate to essential travel. And these exemptions for essential travel to Canada apply not only to Brazilians, but to other travelers from around the world, and are really to make sure that essential travel, particularly in key sectors such as agro-food, transport, or health, is able to continue, while limiting non-essential travel until such time as the pandemic curve has been flattened and we can reopen many of the essential services that travelers want to see, such as Canada's amazing national parks, and really take advantage of our extraordinary cities. Looking ahead in terms of the migration priorities within the bilateral relationship, obviously international education remains a priority, as does facilitating trade through business-related travel. And while our offices are working virtually, and our visa application centers in Brazil are currently closed temporarily, there still is the online application process that is moving ahead or can be started in order to help position individuals for the gradual reopening that will occur. And I took note of the Consul General's colleagues' comments, the Consul General in Toronto, her comments. Indeed, the situation of students is one that is a priority for the Government of Canada. International students add a lot of depth and experience, as well as a great deal of economic impact. And some of the adjustments that have been made are detailed on our Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada website that allows some additional flexibility during this extraordinary time for students to extend visas to within limited areas, work additional hours. And I know that it won't solve every individual's problems, but those measures are there. And I think it's an important area where we continue to have discussion. Classes, we hope, will restart in September, and various institutions are putting together their plans. And the IRCC team globally continues to work to identify how and when study permits and so forth can continue to be processed, including here in a priority market such as Brazil. In terms of business-related travel, whether it's to develop new partnerships to help facilitate exports or to continue to advance the significant investment between our countries, we do have this at the top of the list for a priority for when travel conditions permit. And our trade team, our migration team are open to continuing to engage with either Brazilian or Canadian companies to help answer your questions now and to help clarify what processes can continue to move forward and how you might be able to do it in the context of this pandemic. We hope this dialogue and this openness to yourselves as companies will make sure that you're in a better position to continue to pursue your business opportunities as soon as those conditions permit. I think as well, it's worth noting the ambassador spoke about the variety of circumstances here in Brazil, just as we have a variety of reopening plans and dates across Canada. We will continue to publish information about travel within Brazil, both restrictions and things to be aware of in terms of quarantine on the travel.gc.ca website. So for Canadian firms looking to come back to Brazil, lots of work that can be done virtually now, but follow travel.gc.ca to monitor how the situation here in Brazil is evolving, and we are keeping that up to date. So just briefly, I hope that gives you a little bit of a sense of the importance that we attach to the education and migration files, the workarounds that we have in place to try and continue to move things forward, and that our offices in Sao Paulo, in Ottawa, beyond, remain open to help you advance your files as best we can in the context. Muito obrigada. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, thank you, Heather. And now I would like to call the Consul General of Brazil in Montreal, Rubens Gama.
Thank you, Paulo. Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à toutes, tous. Good afternoon. As you know, here in Montreal, where we had, I mean, surprisingly for me, snow this morning on May 8th, we are starting to have implementing after 8 weeks of shutdowns and closures. We're starting to implement here the resuming of some of the business. So allow the government of the province allowed a number of regions and businesses and schools to open with different schedules. But one thing that is important is for us to emphasize is that the health officials are really stressing that even though we are talking about resuming some economic activities in Quebec, physical distancing will remain critical and will likely to remain in force for many months, if not longer. I think it's from what I'm seeing now, it's starting to sink in the population in Quebec, and we've been seeing that a lot on TV. We've also talking to people where I still have some contacts that's starting to sink in the fact that this will take a little bit longer to be normal again, life will to become normal again, or that there will be a new normal. So I think that we will probably have to adapt to this new normal that will be from now on, where social distancing will be really the norm. That means that we'll probably, and the government has been talking about that, we'll be avoiding non-essential trips. I mean, working from home whenever possible, canceling gatherings, staying at least 2 meters away from anyone that doesn't live in the same house. The resumption in Quebec of activities will be occurring in phases according to areas of activity and geographic zones. For example, as for the rest of the province, it has been on the reopening since May the 4th. For the Montreal area, it has been postponed twice. It was initially imagined that would be on the 11th of May. Then it was postponed to the 18th. And now, just yesterday, the Prime Minister announced that reopening in Montreal would be postponed again to the 25th of May. This because Montreal has become really the epicenter of the COVID problems here in Quebec. Yesterday number I was just seeing they registered 121 deaths. From that, 119 were in the Montreal island. So, which makes it more complicated in this area. But businesses as a whole will continue to stay in teleworking and remote working, including the diplomatic missions. So right now the consulate is working remotely, and but we are only dealing with urgent matters. So we think we have been discussing ways of resuming more activities and organizing them in ways to become also effectively remote. And that's what we are going to be working in the next week or so. The economic sectors in Quebec that are reopened, that has been announced now, are outside the area, are, for example, constructions work sites, for any kind of constructions work sites, residential, civil engineer, roads, institutional, commercial construction, and also industry supplies for these areas. But again, always the government says that staff should be, as much as possible, continue to work from home or remotely. Some manufacturing companies on May 11th, not in the Montreal area, but in the other areas of the province, were allowed to resume manufacturing plants, resume their activity with a maximum of 50 workers, and then with 50% of what is above that. For example, if you had a plant where used to work 100 employees, they were allowed to open with 50 workers plus 25 employees, so with 75 workers. And that will continue to go like that until the end of May. From May on, the plants will, all the plants, manufacturing plants will be allowed to work with full staff. In terms of schools, it is established that on May 11th, schools would reopen with also a low number of students. We're talking about 30% of students, and I'm referring to middle schools and for children. There has been a lot of debate there. Some teachers, being a little bit afraid from their health, and on the other hand, some parents also afraid if they should send their children or not. There have been a lot of debate on that also. But from now, schools are starting to reopen, but really in a very slow pace. University-wise, higher education will not resume in Quebec before September. Even in September, I talked with someone from McGill, a professor from McGill, a director of one department. I talked on the phone with him last week, and he was telling me that they don't see how in September they will be resuming some of their courses with 200 students in one classroom, as they do have in McGill. So they will have to make adaptations. Probably they will have a mix of some online and inside classes in September. Flights to Brazil, it continues to be extremely difficult. We cannot make if it's not an essential trip, it cannot be made. It's not being authorized. But and now it's been very hard to fly from Brazil to Quebec, or from Quebec to Brazil. We've been with the Brazilians that want to go home. We've been helping with the consulate, and we've been trying to find some routes that they can take. Most of them are doing it through Europe. It's one of the possibilities, because through the United States it's becoming more and more difficult. I'd like to mention that from the part of business that still are going on, we say that the road freight transport between United States and Canada is working. Some Brazilians exporters that do export for Quebec are using this route. They're sending their flights to Miami and then going on land to Montreal. Also, couriers are also using, like FedEx, UPS, are using their distribution center in the United States, so it's also working well. That's a little bit of, an update of what's going on here in Montreal, and I'm open for questions when it's the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rubens. And now I would like to call Elise Racicot, Consul and Senior Trade Commissioner in Brazil.
Bonjour tout le monde. It's really nice to be here today. Thanks to the CCBC for the invite and for everybody who's talked before. I will try to be brief and not to repeat some of the things already mentioned so that we have time for questions. But I will talk here from, of course, from a trade perspective, from an economic perspective in terms of the bilateral relationship. The situation that we're facing right now is, of course, going to be bringing its set of challenges to international trade, including between our two countries. It's been mentioned, the reduced flights internationally, which are often some of the things that we actually say to Canadian companies, that they need to come here and meet their local contacts in order for business to happen. And this is suddenly becoming really difficult and probably for some time. There are also some logistical challenges that companies have been facing in terms of supply chains across the world. Without even mentioning the financial impact of the crisis on companies and how their cash flow might be a disincentive right now to take the extra risks that are implied in doing international trade. So just to mention, that's part of the scenario. We also see that many countries, and not necessarily our two countries specifically, but generally have taken certain restrictive measures towards international trade. And that also brings a gloomy picture and makes it harder sometimes for companies around the world, but also Canadian companies, to make a decision about taking that level of risk and tempting their chances on global markets. All that to say, that's part of the picture, but there's also a lot of silver linings, and I think it's important in those dark moments that we also concentrate on where opportunities lie, and that we make sure that we don't miss out on those. So just to mention, we still serve our clients online, and we've been in touch with many of them. And actually, it seems that many of them are actually enjoying that new way of doing business, at least with us. That digital transformation is really happening fast for the Trade Commissioner services around the world, but definitely our team in Brazil. And we had a retreat last week where we discussed among ourselves what would be some of the areas where we think there will be some new opportunities. So based on those discussions, I'll share just a few quick insights. Of course, education, for instance, is a big part of our relationship. But distance education, for instance, and curriculums from Canada that could be brought to Brazil have been sparking a lot of interest locally, and it might be a way also to continue to grow that relationship in a new way. Telemedicine solutions and e-health in general is also an area that I think we can explore more. And in many ways, any kind of solution that will bring physical distancing, whether it's in the industry, whether it's in terms of how can we track it, whether it's in the way that we organize our manufacturing capacity, all of those solutions are increasingly attractive at the moment and will likely continue to be even as we walk out of this crisis. E-commerce, of course, there are places around the world, including China, where this was already a reality, where this has just exploded now. But I think we see it also in markets like Canada and in Brazil, especially with an important number of people who are now also getting into the formal economy and with access to banking services through fintech and whatnot that were previously not part of that consumer pool. So even though there are difficulties, some of those areas emerge as some that we need to think about. And I know it's been mentioned a little bit before, but some of the reforms that have been accelerated by the crisis, whether it's in terms of electronic transaction and paperwork and some of the labor reforms that were mentioned by Adema, I think, and reduced tariffs on a series of products, at least here in Brazil, will make Brazil an even more attractive place to do business for Canadian companies. So that's something that we certainly hope to be able to help Canadian companies take advantage of that once we get out of this initial stage. There are also opportunities that we see that we had already started working on, but we see that trend accelerating. And my colleague, the Consul General in Rio, mentioned before some of the digital transformation in the oil and gas industry work that the team in Rio and Sao Paulo have worked together on a series of webinars and other initiatives. I think it's a significant interest that we have in common. How can we help digitally transform some of those industries that will need to do that? So the whole industry 4.0 and all the technology that allows it to become a reality was something that we talked a lot about, but I think it's kind of that wrecking ball of COVID-19 making it happen so much faster than we had anticipated. So, which could actually be a good thing in terms of our commercial relationship. Clean tech, things like drones, artificial intelligence, data. I think anything that provides data analytics that will help decision making is also of a lot of interest at the moment, especially for policy. And I think Canada has interesting solutions in all those fields. So this is areas where we can collaborate. I think the fact that the 5G auction is also expected to go as planned here in Brazil is such a big market. I think it's a really attractive proposition in that there is going to be some space for Canadian players as well. Research and innovation were mentioned right of the start, but I think just to say this is something that Canada and Brazil have enjoyed for a long time. It's our 10th anniversary this year of our special science, technology, and innovation agreement bilaterally, but also for many more years we've had strong collaborations in terms of research, and I think we continue to do, especially in areas that are quite relevant right now, which include healthcare and public health. So those areas are traditionally some that we've been really enjoying strong collaboration with Brazil. And I think in this world that we're in right now, these are definitely areas that we want to see more happen. Just to conclude, I wanted also to mention that we see new ways of doing business and for us in the TCS as well, for the Trade Commissioner Service, I should say. So the Trade Commissioner Service has helped through this crisis in many parts of the government, including on how to secure some supply chains in critical equipment, for instance, whether it's PPEs or technology, such as respirators and or parts of those that were used to fight COVID-19 or still used to do that. Also to remove some barriers when there were obstacles to those critical supply chains. We're also trying to help exporting Canadian capacities at this right moment that are used in this fight. So we've been in touch here locally with many interested local governments and municipalities and healthcare providers in terms of how can we make sure that those Canadian capacities are known and that they can be used so that both sides benefit from these capacities. We also have seen a lot of programs in Canada that were put together with the help of the Trade Commissioner Service to support companies in terms of their cash flow, but also in terms of guarantees to access loans. So there's been a tremendous amount of work, and over 550,000 SMEs in Canada have already received help through some of those mechanisms. So finally, I want to say here in Brazil, we've been fully virtual, the most of the trade team since mid-March, but we continue to entertain out calls with Canadian companies and with our Brazilian contacts. We do out calls as well, and we're preparing even missions, for example, around collision that will happen in Toronto in June. Also, we're participating in the education fair that's being organized next week for all of the Americas, where over 100 Canadian institutions will participate. And I understand there's over 22,000 prospective students from the Americas that are already planning on participating to that. So a lot of new things that we're trying to experiment with, but definitely one thing that we're trying to do is continuing to serve our clients and making sure that they get the right information and that they have access to understanding and analysis on the different sectors, what's going on, and where to look. So I'll keep it at that so that my other colleagues can also have time to speak and that we have time for questions, I hope. But I'll just mention that if there are any questions remained unanswered at the end, I'm more than happy that the CCBC channels them to the Trade Commissioner Service here in Brazil, and we'll make sure that you get an answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elise. And now I would like to call the Consul General of Brazil in Vancouver, Silvio de Albuquerque Silva.
Thank you very much, Paulo. Good morning to everybody. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Bom dia. Bom dia de Vancouver. Good morning from Vancouver. Well, the first reflection that I want to share with you is my feeling that here in Western Canada, in the prairies, there is a consensus that public authorities have been very efficient in dealing with the public emergency in health that came up with the pandemic. But there remains a very important challenge ahead: how to fulfill the huge expectation of the population in general here in Western Canada and in the prairies on the effectiveness of the business recovery plans that have been presented by the governments of Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan. To take the example of British Columbia, from forestry and film to mining, manufacturing, services, and real estate, it is hard to predict the depth and the damage or length of time in which it will take for the province to recover. As for the relaunch strategy that was presented last Wednesday, when we had our first meeting here, the new normal will come to life cautiously after Victoria Day, so on May the 18th. Despite all that, I consider it positive that the provincial governments of these three provinces have not expressed an overly optimistic timelines of when the crisis will end and when things can restart or start returning to pre-COVID-19 normal. Doing that would make the disillusionment by the public worse if it doesn't happen as planned. Well, in my view, a key strategic question that the private sector, as well as we from the public sector, should ask is what kind of economy one sees on the other side of the pandemic. I was talking about it with Michael Lawson, my colleague, who helped me in organizing ideas to share with you today. Some in BC believe that the province should deepen its investment in renewable energy and green industries, intended, among other factors, to withstand future economic shocks. Regardless of the outcome of this discussion, which is always very tense here in Western Canada, I would like to say that it's undeniable the fact that energy, whether carbon-oriented or renewable, is one economic sector that can have, not only in Western Canada, but also in Newfoundland, Labrador, as well as in Rio, Espírito Santo, and other states in Brazil, a direct and immediate impact on jobs, stimulate investment, and create benefits for small and large communities, including, in the case of Brazil and Canada, Indigenous people. I believe that this is a critical moment to strengthen the bilateral dialogue and cooperation between Brazil and Canada in the energy sector, including advancements in carbon capture and storage as an efficient means of generating energy. And here I want to insist on the huge impression on me and my colleagues here at the Consulate General that a visit to the company called Carbon Engineering, located in Squamish, has caused. I believe that we should explore the possibilities of a bilateral dialogue in the area of energy, not excluding this area, this innovative area of carbon capture and generation of energy. Concerning other potential sectors for bilateral cooperation and possible joint ventures, I would stress opportunities in BC and Alberta in a vast range of sectors based on intellectual capital, as Elise has just referred to, the so-called knowledge economy. And here I'm thinking of tech sectors where startups located in Vancouver and
Silvio, acho que você ficou no mudo.
Okay, are you listening to me now?
Agora sim. Okay.
Okay, so I'll go back to refer to other potential sectors that, in my view, could be open to bilateral cooperation now. And I was stressing the opportunities that in BC, in a vast range of sectors based on intellectual capital, as referred by Elise, the so-called knowledge economy. And here I'm thinking of tech sectors where startups located in BC and in Alberta thrive, including clean tech, fintech, life sciences, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and digital entertainment. There is already a very consistent and highly qualified presence of Brazilian professionals working in tech companies here in BC and Alberta. And in my view, now is the time to identify opportunities to strengthen the cooperation in this domain, amplifying the opportunities of cooperation between tech companies of both countries, as well as the dialogue among universities and think tanks. And I'm sure that we can count on the full support of the Chamber of Commerce, Paulo, in this endeavor. And I want to finalize insisting on the importance of including in our discussions the situation faced by international students here in Canada. Well, most of the foreign students in Western Canada went back home. Those who didn't go back home, I can give the example of my daughter. She's here. She was attending a college course here in Vancouver, but she had just some weeks of course and had to interrupt the course 1.5 months ago. So those who chose to stay in Vancouver during the COVID-19 partial lockdown to find summer job are facing a very difficult situation nowadays. It is hard to forecast how many international students will actually return either to Canada or other nations, but the mass exodus of foreign students is brewing into a crisis for colleges and universities in Western Canada that rely on their high fees to balance their budgets. So I wonder how Canada and the provinces plan to act in order to deal with this problem. Well, some numbers. Brazil ranked 5th in 2017 with 5,800 Brazilian international students in BC. As for language students, data provided by Languages Canada in 2015 indicated that in British Columbia in the year 2014, Brazil was the second leading source country of language students, behind Japan. But we have strong evidence to support the fact that Brazil is probably now the top source country in Western Canada. So I believe that reinventing the way knowledge is going to be transmitted by universities and colleges to students is very important. But there is a great deal of anxiety on the part of students on how they're going to be able to count on what I would call flexibility on the parts of universities and colleges in dealing with a very different approach that they have to have regarding the price of fees for international students, and especially how they're going to be received in campus, and let's think about the circumstance of sharing homestays in houses or even in the universities. So there are many questions open to be answered by the public authorities, especially by colleges and universities. And we feel here in the Consulate General that those Brazilian students who stayed are asking these questions to us and don't receive on the part of universities and colleges very convincing responses that may tranquilize them and their parents. Thank you very much again, and I'm here anxious to answer any question that might come up to reflect the reality of Western Canada. Thank you, Paulo.
Okay, thank you, Silvio. And now we open the floor for questions. If anyone has a question, please come forward, please. Just to break the ice, as we say, I'll start with a question while people start thinking in another question. So we talked about various things already, mobility, and one for students and even business travel mobility. But another challenge is logistics. How do you see the recovery of logistics for the Brazil-Canada logistics for imports and exports? Elise, would you like to say something?
I can try to answer. I don't have a. That's the moment where we'd like to have a crystal ball, I think, and to see what the future will tell us in terms of logistics. I think at the beginning of all of this, we were, in a way, expecting even more challenges in terms of containers, for example. I think it's been at least to the point where our clients have been telling us that's been less of an issue than we at one point expected. There was an expected big shortage of container after China was reducing its exports and imports. So, but it hasn't affected directly any of our clients. So, quite frankly, I think that it continues to be an issue. But cargo hasn't been hit in the same way that travelers have. So I think some areas that are still more complex are when it involves people. And so anything that has to do with services or intra-company models where if you have investments in both countries and you need people to go from one place to another, that's, I think, where we've seen the most negative impact so far for companies that are active between our two countries. It might be a different experience for specific companies, but overall, this is what we've heard from our clients.
Paul, I could just add one comment, 1 minute comment. Of course, for Brazil as a whole, there's not things are not that bad shape, because we have seen that the prices of cargo, basically sea cargo, has been dropping dramatically during the crisis. So Brazil is taking benefit of this in his exports exports and trade balance. And but of course, everything which relates to logistics will depend on the outcome of the crisis of the pandemics in the U.S. as long as Brazil-Canada foreign trade is concerned. All the cargo that comes from Brazil to Canada has stopovers in the Caribbean islands or in the American ports, which are now being closed or with severe restrictions. And exports from from Canada to Brazil, most of them, sensitive cargo, for instance, that has to be transported, they are being transported by plane. They have to go to Frankfurt and then Frankfurt to Brazil. So we hope that those things will resume. And in terms of Brazil-Canada, of course, one of the reasons that the trade balance has been impacted so unfavorably has to do with logistics and our reliance upon the facilities that could be offered by the Caribbean islands in the USA. And so it's, as Elise said, it's impossible to have a crystal ball on what is going to happen with the US, but we will have to expect most tougher regulations and the tougher requirements that I think that what's going to happen with the foreign trade and international passengers, exactly what happened after the September 11th in the United States, when security measures have been so much more restricted and enhanced. Now I think we're going to have to see the same as regards passenger travel between our countries and the interchange of merchandise and services.
May I add something, Paulo?
Yes, please.
Well, just to complement, it's very, very good comments that Ademar just did. To say that I totally agree with him. This is one of the reasons that I mentioned the efforts we are doing to try to map what is ahead. This is a particularly important issue. So the restart of the flights brings with it not only the passenger situation, but also what will be the conditions for cargo, if we can have bigger hopes or not, for what was very promising before the crisis, like the development of air cargo. Another issue, we are in touch with different embassies here in Ottawa to try to find out useful information from them. One perhaps useful piece of information I got is that apparently Panama has now a lot of refrigerated containers, and of high quality refrigerated containers, because they have been doing great efforts in recent years to become a medical supplies hub. So apparently there was a tremendous problem with the distribution of refrigerated containers in the beginning of the crisis. So I think it's interesting to point out that Panama says they have them. If someone needs this particular kind of contact, we can work on that. It would be interesting also to know if other airlines that are resuming flights will how they will treat cargo, as Ademar pointed very well. What are going to be the restrictions also for affecting third destination points? So this is precisely the kind of aspect we are very interested in learning from you, from your members, from the chamber. As ports go in Brazil, we don't have information about major disruptions or outbursts of the virus affecting port operations, and this is obviously something that we will follow with great attention here in Canada also, because that could be a critical aspect if all of a sudden we see ports being severely affected by the crisis. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We have been receiving some questions about visas, especially student visas or work permit visas. So if both countries, both diplomats could comment a little bit about how we are proceeding during this quarantine pandemic time.
If I may say one thing, one question that we saw quite frequently is about visas that are about to expire for Brazilians who are here in Canada. So that is a point that the government of Canada has cleared a while ago, that those that have their visas expiring can file for the extension, and during the appreciation of the request, they will remain legal in Canada. So I think this is, in my view, is probably the most important question. The others who are thinking about coming to Canada and dreaming that things will come back to normal, I think our Canadian colleagues could explain better. But that is obviously linked to the reopening of the entry into the country. It's not just the case of the visa.
Okay, thank you. Someone from Canada?
Paulo, thank you very much. Indeed, I think we would all like to see the education sector in both countries opening quickly, whether it's to get children back to school or to continue with the programs and the momentum that we had in the relationship before this pandemic. And as I said, our colleagues at IRCC, Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, have made some adjustments already for the students that are currently in Canada. And a lot of time in the discussion is taking place around how and when and programs across the country at different levels might reopen. And Elise spoke about the important opportunities that exist in terms of distance education, corporate training, and so forth, which are also virtual ways right now of helping to respond to skills gaps or to develop talent. And so I think that's worth underscoring. The final thing that I would say is that we do still have, for those students who are looking to come to Canada later in 2020, you know, some of the education fairs are starting to move online, and there are materials that both institutions and other entities are putting out about how to apply, what it's like to study in Canada and so forth. So there's many pieces of the education puzzle that are moving virtually and that are being advanced. But there's still work to do, and those discussions are underway. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Another question we have is about Brazilian government reducing certain measures or lowering taxes restricted to the health sector. Can you say something about it? For imports of health products, APIs, and things like that.
We pass to us, if you can, the email of the interested party, and we'll it's an important issue that we'll try to be precise, so I would not dare to give an imprecise answer in the debate, but we'll be very happy to look into it as fast as we can.
Okay, and I'll just make a final question here, and we'll forward the other questions by email because we are running late in terms of time. During this period, of course, the focus is much more in controlling the virus. But I wonder, how do you see the paths for the negotiation of the Mercosur-Canada Free Trade Agreement, and how is the development of the negotiations?
May I say something?
Yes, please.
Well, I actually, you read my mind, Paulo, because I was going to suggest that we say a word about that, also because one of the participants asked a question a couple of days ago, we didn't have a chance to answer. And that gives us a chance to finish the discussion in a positive note. We never gave up this very positive idea, and we have signs that the negotiations can continue. We also have signs that, you know, right now there is a process of definition how Argentina will follow the negotiations and how far they will agree to let us proceed. But the signs regarding, particularly the case of Mercosur-Canada, are good, and we're very optimistic that we can proceed. So we were expecting to have 2 rounds of negotiations this semester. This, of course, has been changed by the events, but we are very positive about that. And I think this opens a range of possibilities that we expect to move on. This is something I have been insisting, and I think we all should, like the colleagues also mentioned, exciting possibilities for investment and other fields. We should look ahead. Crisis is also a synonym of opportunities. To give you another example, we have signs that the business of renewable energy is full of possibilities that can move on, crisis or no crisis. And in the field of investments, I would dare say that maybe we will see Canadian investors emboldened by the need to look for higher returns and better options to recompose their portfolios after taking, for quite a few of them, taking a very sizable hit. So we'll be happy to work on that. And we also hope that the reforms in Brazil will continue and will continue to present exciting possibilities. So Mercosur is certainly in the radar. I think right now it looks quite positive.
Thank you. Jennifer, would you like to comment?
I'd love to, and I couldn't agree more with everything that that Pedro said. And it's been fantastic to participate in all of this. I think the Mercosur negotiations and the negotiators are really showing some of the ingenuity that we've been talking about in terms of doing virtual discussions and taking advantage of technological tools to make sure that they don't stop. The other thing I would just add is that I think this crisis is also showing businesses and governments the importance of diversification, that having multiple trade partners, having stronger and diversified supply chains is important and more important now than ever. And I think the Canada, sorry, I came out of Germany before here and I got used to saying the EU-Canada trade agreement. The Canada-Mercosur trade agreement that we're working on is really going to help support those endeavors. Thank you very much, and thank you for a fantastic seminar. Really appreciate it both today and on Wednesday.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would like just to follow from both of your comments to say that this time here, with all these challenges, is also a time for planning and adapting. And we've been working at the Chamber together with Brazilian and Canadian companies to adapt, to rethink, and adjust for the recovery of this new normal to come. It's interesting to mention that during the quarantine times, we had got 11 new members of the Chamber, being 4 Canadian companies and 5 Brazilian companies that are using the support of the Chamber to, as you say, to think about diversifying their markets, looking to the other country as a potential partner for future business, and looking at the Chamber as a key strategic partner to make it happen. So to conclude, I would like to comment that we also are working at full speed at the Chamber in a virtual mode. All our commissions are working actively. We have on the pipeline webinars for the mining sector, for the healthcare sector, for investments and infrastructure, for juridical affairs to talk about regulations and many other things. So I invite you to follow our events at the social media or at our website. Here at the screen, you can check our contacts in Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. So I'd like now to finalize thanking all the participants who have been with us during the seminar, and also with the presenters that enriched this discussion in what it was the first series of the Brazil-Canada talks. That was a 2-day event, one in Portuguese 2 days ago, and this one now in English, covering Brazil-Canada, a rich dialogue between the two countries on the impact of COVID-19 in business and the perspectives for future recovery. And we wish you all a very good time and a safe time, everyone in their own homes, as we say, everyone in his own safe spot, but together through technology. It's a great thing that we have this technology available. Actually, the technology was available before, but it seems we didn't have enough courage to adapt ourselves to use it in its full capacity. And this pandemic situation has forced us to do the things that we would maybe do in 4 or 5 years now. And now things are happening. Even though we're isolated, but we are all much closer. Here we got a very particular and special example of bringing together coast to coast of Canada and Brazil in the single event. And we hope to keep doing that in the near future. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all. Merci beaucoup à tous et à toutes. And muito obrigado a todos.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Paulo.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice weekend.
Thanks, Paulo.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Obrigado, Paulo.